Hi, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Learning how to become an emergency medical responder. So that's going to be consuming some of my time, but nevertheless, enough about me. Please take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the podcast, ring the bell so you get notified of future updates. Also, understand if you're like, well, what is this all about? Well, Living the Wildlife is all about providing research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest control. So if it has a spine and it bothers you and it's not human, we're interested in talking about it. So we tend to take a little bit more of an arcane, kind of a geeky approach. So we also get into some of the scientific literature, things that you're not necessarily going to learn through your own experience or hard knocks. So that's the approach that we take. We hope you enjoyed it. Always looking for people to be guests on the show. If you have a product or topic, issue that's bothering you, or perhaps something you'd like to sell out to a wider public, we'd love to hear from you. We welcome guests on our show so that we can get information out to this audience of wildlife control operators. So you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Thoughts about shows, yes, even criticisms. We'll take that as well. Here's one of my books that I've revised. The original was written by Steve Meyer, and I revised it to bring it a little bit more up to date and expanding it somewhat, because cage traps are not necessarily humane or automatically humane as people think they are. So they get footholds, getting a lot of bad press. But cage traps can be really horrific in some ways, or box traps as well. So you can learn how to make your cage and box trapping more humane if you're going to be treating an animal. Because after all, our goal is not to see how much pain we can cause an animal. We just need to solve a problem. So be ethical, be respectful, and try to improve your skill set. And this is a book that may help you to do that. All right, enough of all that. What is this week's topic? Well, I wanted to get into being safe in bear country. I've been dealing with that as kind of a theme, but I've got to get down to the portion, the section on part 2, because I've been dealing with this. Of course, you see the bear spray part 1. I got to get to bear spray part 2. So this is my last episode here on this particular topic that I'm dealing with, and so I'm hoping that this is going to be certainly something that's going to be helpful. I don't know why my screen is not allowing this to be done. There's some sort of a glitch that I'm struggling with here, so my apologies. Let me kind of get down to where we're at here in this particular podcast. So forgive my issue. I'm having there we go. All right, that's what I want. So I've been doing a series of presentations on bear conflicts from some of the literature, and I've given you some of that before, so definitely go back and listen to those if you're interested in that. I know that bears aren't necessarily high on our wildlife control operator list. Typically, most state agencies get kind of nervous about us moving into that particular area, at least at this particular time. However, some of you, of course, are going to be out perhaps hunting, perhaps trapping, perhaps even servicing a client who's out in bear country, and you certainly need to protect yourself, because as you've learned, some of these bears are actually attacking people inside their house. So what would stop them from doing it to you while you're trapping in someone's backyard, right? So this is certainly something for you to think about. So last time, my last presentation on bears dealt with bear spray part 1. Well, now we're going to get into bear spray part 2, And it's kind of going to be a brief presentation today, but we're going to get into some of the technical aspects of the bear spray. Last time we were getting into its efficacy. Now we're going to kind of drill down into some of the technical aspects of the spray itself. So what we have here is, what is bear spray, right? Well, you can see that on the screen, but those of you who are driving, don't stop. Okay, keep your eyes on the road. But oleracin capsicum, 1 to 2%. And my understanding is from elsewhere. Excuse me, the fire department's calling for an emergency. Oh, no, just a test page. And my understanding is that this is Africanized. So it's African capsicum, so it's pretty strong. I have had a whiff of it when I was back in Nebraska. I got an old can that they were just tossing out, and so I scarfed it up. And I figured, well, I've never really sprayed it, so I just went to my backyard and sprayed, and I should have paid a little more attention to the wind direction. And I'm just telling you, I just got the faintest of whiff. And it was, wow. Okay, and it's not a full on. I just got a little bit of the capsaicin or gas or the particles, just a touch of it. And I was, wow. That's all I can say. It was like, so I can't even imagine what it would be like to get it full on. Okay, so I'm just telling you, the stuff it's for real. So it has a pretty strong element of capsicum, and that's the same kind of ingredient when you get hot sauce, right? So if you get some really hot sauce, that's what makes it hot. It's this capsicum, because it kind of burns on your tongue. In addition, it has a carrier, or what they call a thinning agent, because they kind of had to make it into a liquid, right? Because it's coming out in a spray, and then they have a propellant, something that's going to project it, and that's typically the refrigerant, and it's under pressure, right? So like any aerosol can, it's got pressure inside of it, and it's pushing out this particleized liquid, and that's basically what it is in terms of its fundamental components. Well, they did some field testing with these particular products, and so they basically were showing how it sprays out from your canister, right? And so here you have an example of where they're testing it in a place of no wind, and you can see the spray pattern. Now, your particular spray can may look differently, but it gives you a sense about how far it goes out and how it sort of spreads out as you're spraying it from the can. Notice that we're looking at out to 7 meters on that outer edge, okay? And you can see how the relative density of the spray hits out 6.5 meters for that little thin red part out here. There's still a lot of heavily concentrated spray there. When you start getting out into the greens and the blues, it's getting pretty thin at that spot, because this is the relative density over here. But it's basically this big cone of nastiness. That's all I can basically say about it. But it should be encouraging to you that if you're in a situation with no wind, you're gonna, with a fresh can, okay, it has to be a fresh can that's not so degraded, because you lose a little bit of pressure over time, but you're going to get out there 5 to 7 meters when you just launch that thing, right? And how long that whole dispersion was, that spray time, was 70 seconds. So they did it just a little over a minute of spray, and I would suspect that it's finally empty by that point. So what does it look like when they, in terms of a two-dimensional type look here, right? So what they did was they basically put out this long sheet of white, I believe it's white paper, and they put the canister on top of a tripod, and the tripod made it so that the nozzle was 50 centimeters above ground. And I've already converted it for you here. So the spray element was 20 inches off the ground, which is kind of low. And it gives you an idea of how that pattern, how far out the liquid goes, okay? So the tarp that's being shown here is 44 inches wide and 144 feet long. And look at how far out the liquid goes when they only had it not even 2 feet off the ground. So you can imagine, obviously, if you held the canister higher, it would have gone even further, right? You probably would have maybe got another meter out of it. It's hard to say that in abstract here. But so you certainly get some serious distance, and look at how much distance you have there and how much concentration of that liquid is coming out. So imagine a bear getting a full blast of this in their face. And bears have some of the best noses in the world, and they're getting it filled with capsaicin, plus the bear's breathing as it's trying to attack you, right? So it's putting in all this airflow, and so it's sucking all this in, and it's basically inflaming all of their eyes and nose, and so you can imagine why it stops bears so frequently. Now, the temperature of the can matters. So they tested the can's distance and spray pattern based on the temperature. So they had -9 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty cold. -1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, that's still pretty cold. And notice the difference at 64 degrees Fahrenheit, how it really allows the liquid to become more aerosolized when the can is warmer. And they'll have a recommendation on how you store the can, because a lot of people encounter bears, of course, in the winter, sometimes in the wintertime, not when they're hibernating, but in those edge periods where it still gets pretty cold out there. And so you're going to need to make sure you pack your can properly, so that you want to make sure it's working well. Now, what happens? People are always worried about headwinds, right? So what happens if I don't want to use a bear spray? It's why I'm going to carry a gun, because I'm afraid the spray, I'm going to be in the headwind and the spray is not going to work. Well, they tested it in 22 mile per hour winds, and the spray still reached 2 meters. Okay, so a little over 6 feet, it still reached. Pretty impressive when you consider that, it's a limited can. It's not like it has, thousands of pounds per square inch pressure coming out of there, right? And it still reached out 2 meters. So you shouldn't be as concerned about headwind. You need to be concerned, obviously, about wind, but it shouldn't be a huge issue. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. Now, what happens to the speed of the spray over time? So you basically have your canister and you spray it. How fast is that coming out? Well, clearly, when you're first hitting it, that's going to be the fastest time, right? And that is when it's up to, 18 meters per second almost, probably 17 meters per second. But as time progresses, 0.4 seconds, it's starting to drop down to 4 meters and then 3 meters per second. So that initial blast is the fastest that's going to be coming out of the canister, and it degrades over time because there's only so much refrigerant in there, and that starts losing the pressure. So time matters when you're dealing with these with these devices. So the cans over time lost 0.7 to 1.9 grams to 5.5 grams of product per year, depending on the product, right? So that means they were weighing these cans and they were like, how much is left? So it's losing material over time. Now, 0.7 grams, that's pretty light, right? When you start getting up to 5.5 grams, that's getting kind of serious. So the point here is you want to be sure you're watching the expiration date of your spray can and take that seriously. It's there for a reason, not just because the manufacturer is trying to gouge you, right? It's because they can only make it so tight, it's going to leak pressure over time, and that's going to be a problem for you, right? And the other thing that they noticed is that when you trigger the can, you lose half of the head pressure in 1.4 seconds. So if you have 100% pressure when you first touch it, in 1.4 seconds, you're down to 50% pressure of what you had from the beginning. And if you held it in place, the entire can was exhausted in 7 seconds. So choose wisely about your use. And basically what they were pointing out is that after 4 seconds, the can is essentially useless because those last 3 seconds, the plume of what's being projected out of the can is too short to be effective. Okay? So one of the things that they mentioned was don't just go a little squirt. If you're going to use the product, use it. Don't try to save it because you're not really saving much because, again, at 1.4 seconds, you're already at 50% power. Okay, so if you're going to use it, they said use it. So if you're worried about that, then the goal would be to carry more than 1 can. Okay, maybe, and I would probably suggest everyone in your party should probably have their own can, right? So that would give you additional power. Okay, and maybe a backup. It depends on how nervous you are and what the kind of situation you're getting yourself into. But it's a judgment call, right? So they also found that in 4 years, your canister was losing about 7 to 8% of the propellant. And just that little amount lost 40% loss of your head pressure. Think about that for a moment. Just a 7 to 8% loss of propellant resulted in a 40% reduction in head pressure. This is why you have to follow manufacturer guidelines for the expiration. Do not screw with that. What I would suggest, if what you're going to do with your expired canisters is use them to train with, right? So make sure you watch the weather and go out into a more remote area, and then you could practice with it, right? Get a feel for what it's like. But don't just squirt, your new one. Oh, does it really work? Once you purchase a new one, don't be squirting it unless you need to squirt it because you're losing so much pressure, right? Do that with your expired canisters. So the conclusions of the researchers on this particular publication that I didn't give. So let me see what that is. And that was Tom Smith et al. 2021. Investigation of Factors Influencing Bear Spray Performance, Journal of Wildlife Management, Volume 85, Issue 1, pages 17 through 26. Let me give that again. I want to be sure the researchers get credit for that. I'm just giving you the first author here, right? So the researcher's name was Tom S. Smith and others. He wasn't alone in this, but he's the primary author if you want to look this up yourself. Published in 2021, so just 4 years ago, right? 3 years ago, Investigation of Factors Influencing Bear Spray Performance, published in the Journal of Wildlife Management, Volume 85, Issue 1, pages 17 through 26. So the conclusions of the authors of this particular paper was that they were saying, look, bear spray has never killed anybody, and it's never killed the bear. So you say, well, they treated those as two benefits, where if you're thinking you have a gun, if you listen to one of my previous podcasts about an article that dealt with guns in bears, sometimes people would have the gun and they wouldn't use it because they were afraid they would shoot their friend, because they didn't think they could shoot the bear. Because remember, when you're in that type of a stressful environment, you got an adrenaline dump, and unless you train for that, you're going to be shaky, right? Because one of the effects of adrenaline dumps is the shakes. So it's a highly stressful period. So the point is, they're saying one of the advantages of using bear spray over a gun is that you don't have to worry about killing your friend or yourself, right? And so that is by using a firearm. So this isn't an anti-gun rant here. That's not my point. My point is that we're looking at how do we protect ourselves from bear attacks, right? And so these are the researchers' conclusions, and I'm trying to give you an explanation of the rationale behind their conclusions. So it's never killed a person. Bear spray has never killed a bear. And bear spray, they said, allows for rapid deployment. One of the challenges with guns is that people don't practice. because typically if you're hiking, you want to be sure that gun is locked into a holster so you don't lose it. You don't want to lose it. And so under stress, do you know how to just take that gun out of the holster, chamber it, and get ready to shoot in a fast enough period of time? Where bear spray, people aren't ashamed of having bear spray. It's something you can have out in the open. You can strap it on your chest or whatever. It could be easily available. One thing I didn't think that the authors really dealt with in this article is that there are safety features on these sprays. And so I don't know if there's how many people had trouble firing off the bear spray because they were fussing with the safety features, right? So regardless, make sure if you're getting bear spray, practice chambering it up and getting ready to pull the trigger, right? So that you make sure that any type of spray mechanism, safeties that you have on it or the manufacturers put on it, make sure you know how to easily disengage that. The last thing you want is when you're hunting and you have the safety on and you go click and you're like, oh, I had the safety on, then you got to stop, take the safety off. That's the kind of thing you don't want to be doing when a bear is charging you, okay? So that's really bad. They did say that the bear spray has ease of use, which certainly makes sense, right? You just got to pull the trigger and point, right? And so because it just flows out. But they wanted to be sure that readers understood that you do not test your spray cans. Why? Because in 1.4 seconds, you are losing half of your pressure, right? So don't experiment with it and then think you're going to use that in the field. Buy 2, play with 1, and then carry the other one fully charged, okay, if that's what you want to do. And they also noted that you want to protect cans from the cold because they work better when they are warmer. And so they were saying when you're storing them, try to put them closer to your body in a sense so they can get some warmth. And obviously, when it's really cold in the sort of the dead of winter, you're not going to have to worry about bears anyways because they should be in hibernation. But those things are changing all the time, right? Here in Montana, we've had pesticide changes because bears may not be in hibernation till like December. So this can be a changing thing depending on the type of weather conditions that you're having and how much food is available, right? So something to certainly be careful of. You want to make sure you don't let the cans get excessively cold. There was one other issue that I wanted to sort of make sure I mentioned here that I remember reading. I don't know if it was in this article or whether it was in another one. And that is, remember, people worry about the wind, and the wind is a concern. But many times people are being attacked in the woods, and wind is less of a concern in wooded environments than it is out in the high plains, okay? So it is something to think about. To be sure, you want to be watching, the wind and thinking about the wind, but don't let the wind be an excuse to think, oh, I'm not going to carry bear spray because of the wind. We already saw how even under 22 mile an hour winds, you still got out 2 meters, right? And that's better than nothing. And then, of course, if the wind isn't always going in the wrong direction, sometimes it's going with you, so it actually would extend the charge out even farther. I hope you found this to be helpful, if not informative for you, for those of you living in bear country, or if you're just sort of interested in understanding bear spray. I'm fascinated by it. And so I think that this is something that's good to have in your back pocket to explain those of you that go out hunting, carry some bear spray with you, right? If you're in bear country, it's not that expensive. It lasts for several years, and you may never need to use it, but you have it if you do need it. Just make sure you watch that expiration time. And when it does expire, practice with it, and then make sure you get a replacement, okay? Well, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and I would love to hear from you. If you have comments about the show, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. You have thoughts about the show, suggestions that you would like to have for future shows. I'd love to kind of talk about some topics that maybe I haven't thought about. Otherwise, you're just going to get what I'm thinking about. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time. This is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast with Living the Wildlife Podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.